A veteran inherits a remote house, but his family shows up before he even gets inside. They're not angry. They're afraid of what he might find. His dog stops at the door, frozen, tense, like it remembers something he doesn't. Inside, he finds records with his name, from a past that doesn't exist. Then it hits him. This house wasn't left to him. It was built around him. The people who raised him didn't protect him. They signed him into something he was never meant to survive. Now they're back, not for the house, but to make sure he never tells the truth. They can take his name, his freedom, even prove he's unstable, but they can't stop the one decision that changes everything. So tell me, where are you watching from, and what would you do in his place? If this pulls you in, like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep telling stories like this. The wind had a way of finding every weakness in the cabin. It slipped through the seams of the old wood, whispered under the door, rattled the window frame just enough to keep a man from ever fully forgetting where he was. Or why. Daniel Voss sat at the small table by the window, one hand resting loosely around a chipped mug that had long gone cold. Outside, the Colorado mountains stretched out under a dull, overcast sky, snow falling in slow, steady sheets that erased distance and sound alike. Axel lay near the door, not asleep, not fully awake either. The German shepherd's body was still, but his ears shifted at every subtle change in the wind, always listening, always measuring. Daniel glanced at him, then back at the snow. There had been a time when silence felt earned. Now it just felt unfinished. The phone rang. It didn't happen often enough to ignore. Daniel let it ring twice, 3 times, then reached for it, without urgency. Unknown number. Voss. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel deliberate. Mr. Daniel Voss, a woman's voice said, calm and measured. My name is Helen Crow. I'm an independent attorney calling regarding the estate of Margaret Voss. The name didn't land, not immediately. Daniel's brow tightened slightly, but his voice stayed even. I think you've got the wrong person. I don't, she replied. No hesitation, no attempt to soften it. Margaret Voss passed away 2 days ago. Her will was amended 48 hours prior. You are listed as the sole inheritor of a property known as Hollow Peak Estate. The wind hit the cabin harder just then, a hollow knock against the walls. Daniel said nothing. The name, Margaret Voss, felt like something he should recognize. And not because it was familiar, but because it refused to settle. She wasn't immediate family, Helen continued, as if anticipating the gap. That may be why you're uncertain, but the documentation is clear. The transfer has already been initiated. Daniel looked down at the table, at his hand, at the faint scratches across the back of his knuckles that never quite faded. Why me? He asked. Another pause. I believe, Helen said carefully, that's something Ms. Voss intended for you to discover in person. Daniel almost let out a dry laugh, but it didn't come. Instead, his thumb drifted unconsciously to the face of his watch, tracing along the faint crack in the glass. Where is it? He asked. Hollow Peak, about 30 miles north of your current location. I'll send the coordinates. There is also a key, hidden on site. Instructions will follow. And the rest of the family? Daniel asked. They are not mentioned in the will. That was when Axel stood, not abruptly, not alarmed, just aware. His body shifted forward, weight settling evenly over his paws, eyes now fixed on Daniel, not the door, not the window. Daniel. Helen's voice came again, quieter now. Mr. Voss, I suggest you go sooner rather than later." The line went dead. For a moment, nothing moved. Not Daniel, not the wind, not even Axel. Then the phone buzzed again. Coordinates, just as promised. Daniel set it down slowly. "Margaret Voss," he murmured, testing the name aloud, like it might reveal something if he said it the right way. It didn't. Axel took a step closer. Daniel noticed the shift in him now. Not aggression, not fear. Something else. Tension, but not outward. Contained. "You know something?" Daniel asked quietly. Axel didn't respond the way most dogs would. No tilt of the head, no bark. He simply held still, eyes steady, as if waiting for Daniel to reach the same conclusion. Daniel exhaled slowly and pushed himself up from the chair. He moved toward the window, watching the snow gather along the edge of the clearing. 30 miles north. In weather like this, that could mean anything. He should have left it alone. That would have been the sensible thing. The version of himself that survived by not asking questions. That version would have ignored the call, turned the phone off, gone back to the quiet. But something about the way the lawyer had said his name, something about the timing. 48 hours before she died. People didn't make decisions like that without a reason. The crunch of tires on snow broke the silence. Axel's head snapped toward the door this time. Daniel didn't move right away. He didn't need to look to know who it was. The engine cut. Doors slammed. 2 of them. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Yeah," he muttered. "That was quick." The knock came hard, impatient. Daniel opened the door before it came a second time. Lucas Voss stood on the porch, tall and composed, coat dusted with snow, but otherwise untouched by it. And beside him, Irene adjusted the collar of her light-colored coat, her expression already set, tight, controlled. They didn't look surprised to see him. Lucas stepped inside without waiting. Irene followed, brushing past Daniel as if the space already belonged to her. Axel moved instantly, positioning himself between Daniel and Lucas. Not aggressive, but unmistakably present. Lucas glanced down at the dog, then back at Daniel. His voice was calm. Too calm. "You got the call." Daniel closed the door behind them. "Seems like everyone did." Irene let out a short breath, scanning the cabin with thinly veiled disapproval. "We don't have time for this, Daniel." "For what?" he asked. Lucas turned, meeting his eyes directly now. There was no mockery in it this time, no casual superiority, just intent. "You need to refuse it," Lucas said. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I don't even know what it is." "That's exactly the point." Silence stretched between them, thick as the storm outside. Daniel felt it then. That subtle shift under the surface, not greed, not curiosity. Fear. Real fear. Irene stepped closer, her voice lower. "You don't understand what you're stepping into." Daniel held her gaze. "Then explain it." She didn't. Neither did Lucas. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulling out a folded document. "We brought something for you to sign," he said. "A formal refusal of inheritance. You walk away, this goes to probate, and we handle it." Axel's body tensed. Daniel noticed the way his ears angled, not toward Lucas, but toward the paper in his hand. That was new. Daniel didn't take the document. "What's at Hollow Peak?" he asked. Lucas hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but Daniel saw it. "That place shouldn't exist," Lucas said quietly. "Not anymore." Irene's voice came sharper this time. "Sign it, Daniel." He looked at them both. Really looked. Not as family, Not as people he'd grown up around. As strangers who had shown up too fast and wanted him gone even faster. Daniel stepped back. No. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. Axel shifted closer, one paw brushing against the toe of Daniel's boot. Grounding. Steady. Lucas exhaled slowly, disappointment flickering across his face before it hardened into something else. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. Daniel held his gaze. "No," he said quietly. "I think I'm starting to." Outside, the wind howled louder, snow thickening into a white curtain. Daniel reached for his coat. "Where are you going?" Irene asked. He didn't look at her. 30 miles north." The storm followed them up the mountain. Not behind them. Not chasing. It moved with them, pressing in from every direction until the world narrowed to the road, the headlights, and the slow, steady rhythm of the engine fighting the climb. Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He hadn't in years. Axel sat upright in the passenger seat, body angled slightly toward the windshield, but his eyes weren't fixed on the road. They shifted, subtle, measured, tracking something Daniel couldn't see. "You've been quiet," Daniel said, almost under his breath. Axel didn't respond. The coordinates Helen sent led them farther than Daniel expected. The road thinned, then fractured into something less defined, buried under layers of wind-driven snow. Pine trees crowded closer, their dark shapes leaning inward like they were trying to close the path behind him. 30 miles didn't feel like distance anymore. It felt like separation. By the time the estate came into view, the sky had turned a dull, endless gray. The storm eased, not gone, just quieter, as if something in the mountain itself blocked it. Hollow Peak stood at the edge of a clearing, not a mansion in the grand sense, not polished or elegant. It looked intentional. Stone walls, angular, reinforced in ways that didn't match its age. Windows narrow and deeply set. No decorative elements, no wasted space. It didn't look abandoned. It looked paused. Daniel cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Axel didn't move immediately. His ears tilted forward, then slightly back, then forward again. Processing. Calculating. Daniel stepped out into the cold. Snow crunched beneath his boots, sharp and brittle. The air felt different here. Drier. Thinner, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. He didn't rush. He walked toward the front door, scanning the structure the way old instincts demanded. Entry points, sight lines, shadows. Nothing obvious, but something wasn't right. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a slow resistance, wood dragging faintly against the frame, as if it hadn't been used in a while, but not long enough to warp. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately, not because it was unheated, because the cold had settled. Axel stepped in first. His nails made no sound on the floor. He moved with a deliberate slowness Daniel recognized. Not hesitation, not fear. Awareness. Daniel followed, closing the door behind him. The interior was dim, but not buried in dust like he expected. The air smelled stale, yes, but clean in places. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. A house left untouched for years should feel dead. This didn't. It felt maintained. Selectively, Daniel moved through the main room, his gaze catching small details. Others would have missed. A table with a thin layer of dust, undisturbed. A chair beside it. Clean. The difference wasn't subtle. Someone had been here. Not living. passing through. Axel stopped near the base of a hallway, head low, nose barely moving as he tested the air. "What is it?" Daniel asked quietly. Axel didn't turn. He shifted slightly to the right, then stepped forward, leading. Daniel followed without question. The hallway narrowed, walls closing in slightly, the light thinning with each step. At the far end, a door stood partially ajar. Axel nudged it open. A staircase revealed itself, descending into shadow. Daniel paused. There it was, that familiar pressure at the back of his mind. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. He had felt something like this before. Not here. Somewhere else. He exhaled slowly and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flashlight. "All right," he murmured. They went down. The basement wasn't what the house suggested. It was too structured. Concrete walls reinforced with metal bracing. Wiring that didn't belong in a private estate. Old, but not primitive. Organized. Rows of metal cabinets lined one side of the room. A work table stood in the center, scattered with equipment that had been covered. Carefully. Deliberately. Daniel pulled one of the cloths back. Monitors. Analog controls. Recording units. Military adjacent, at the very least. Axel moved deeper, stopping near the far wall. Daniel followed his line of sight. A shelving unit. Boxes, stacked and labeled, but not clearly. Codes instead of words. Dates instead of names. Daniel reached for one. Inside. Files. He flipped one open. Printed documents. Yellowed at the edges but preserved. Diagrams. Notes. Evaluations. His eyes scanned instinctively, searching for structure, for pattern, then he saw it. A name. Not written boldly, not highlighted, just part of a list. Voss, Daniel. Subject classification. Redacted. Daniel didn't move. The room seemed to shift, not physically, but in weight. Axel stepped closer, pressing lightly against his leg. Daniel swallowed once, slow, controlled. "That's not possible," he said quietly. He didn't believe it, but his body did. His hand moved on its own, flipping through more pages, more names, more codes, more redacted sections. Everything incomplete, everything intentional. A soft click echoed somewhere behind them. Daniel froze. He turned slowly. Nothing. Just the empty staircase. But Axel didn't relax. His posture changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. His body lowered slightly, weight forward. Ears locked. Not alarm. Alert. Daniel's gaze shifted across the room again. That's when he noticed it. A monitor. Partially powered. Not fully active. Not dead either. A faint flicker across the screen. Daniel stepped toward it, each movement measured. He brushed away dust and pressed a switch. The screen came alive in a stuttering glow. Static first, then an image. Grainy. Old, but clear enough. A room. Smaller. Clinical. A figure seated at a table. Head turned away. A man. Broad shoulders. Still posture. Daniel leaned closer. Something about the way the man held himself. Not the face. The posture. The stillness. Recognition hit. Not as a thought, but as a physical reaction. His chest tightened, breath catching before he could stop it. The man in the video turned slightly. Just enough. Not a full reveal. but enough. Daniel stepped back. Axel pressed into him harder this time, grounding, steady. On the screen, text flickered into place beneath the image. A subject, Voss, Daniel. Program, Behavioral Response Reconstruction. The footage glitched, then continued. Voices, faint, distorted. Stimulus response, controlled environment. Memory suppression within acceptable range. Daniel shook his head once, as if the motion alone could clear it. I was never here, he said, but the words felt hollow, because something deeper, something buried under years of silence, was already responding. Not with memory, with familiarity. Axel let out a low sound, not a growl, not a warning. Something closer to recognition. Daniel looked down at him, then back at the screen, and for the first time since the call, he understood something clearly. He hadn't come here to find a secret. He had come here to find what was missing. The storm returned without warning. By the time Daniel and Axel climbed back up from the basement, the house had changed, not physically, but in the way it held sound. The wind pressed harder against the walls now, slipping through unseen gaps, carrying a low, constant hum that made the structure feel awake. Daniel didn't look back at the monitor. He didn't need to. Whatever he had just seen wasn't something he could process in a single moment. It settled deeper than thought, somewhere closer to instinct. Axel stayed close this time. Not ahead. Not leading. Beside him. Daniel reached the main room when he heard the engine. Not one. Two. Headlights cut across the front windows, slow and deliberate, beams diffused by thick snow, but unmistakable. The vehicles didn't rush in. They approached like they already belonged here. Daniel didn't move immediately. He stood still, listening. Doors opened, closed, voices, muted by distance, but controlled. Axel shifted, his posture lowering just slightly, ears locked forward. His focus wasn't scattered. It was fixed. Daniel stepped toward the window, just enough to see. Lucas stepped out first, coat buttoned high, movements precise even in the storm. Irene followed, pulling her collar tighter, her face pale but composed. Behind them, a third figure emerged from the second vehicle, older, thinner. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Not recognition, not exactly, but proximity, like standing too close to a memory he couldn't access. The knock came again, but softer this time. Measured. Daniel opened the door before it could repeat. Cold air rushed in, along with the faint scent of something metallic beneath the snow. Lucas stepped inside without greeting. Irene followed, her eyes scanning the room, sharper now than before. The third man entered last. He removed his gloves slowly, one finger at a time, as if the action itself mattered. Daniel Voss, he said. His voice was quiet, not weak, controlled. It carried the weight of someone used to being heard without needing volume. Daniel didn't respond. The man studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod, as if confirming something to himself. You made it this far, he said. That's more than most. Axel moved. Not forward, not attacking. He stepped between Daniel and the man, body angled just enough to create distance. The man noticed. A faint smile touched his lips. Not warm, not amused. Still reactive to scent patterns, he murmured. Good. Daniel's jaw tightened. Who are you? He asked. Before the man could answer, another voice cut in from behind. Someone who should have stayed buried. Helen Crow stepped into the doorway, brushing snow from her coat as she entered without waiting for permission. Her presence shifted the room immediately, not by force, but by certainty. She didn't look surprised to see anyone, only disappointed. "Daniel," she said, her tone direct, "you need to hear this now." Lucas exhaled sharply. "Helen, this isn't your—" "It became my concern the moment Margaret amended her will," she replied, cutting him off cleanly. She stepped further inside, placing herself slightly to Daniel's side. Not in front of him. Not behind him. "Well, that man," she continued, glancing briefly toward the older figure, "is Evan Krell." The name hung in the air. Daniel felt it this time. Not memory. Weight. "Krell was part of a private program," Helen said. "Funded off books. Partially contracted through military channels. Officially, it never existed." Evan didn't interrupt. He simply watched. Helen's gaze shifted back to Daniel. Margaret Voss wasn't just aware of it. She funded it. Early on, before she understood what it had become. Daniel's hand moved unconsciously, thumb brushing against the cracked face of his watch. "And after?" he asked. "She tried to shut it down," Helen said. "When that failed, she started documenting everything." Silence followed. Not empty, heavy. Lucas stepped forward, his voice calm but edged. "You're leaving out context." Helen didn't look at him. Then at it. Lucas hesitated. Irene didn't. "She signed the agreements," Irene said, her voice steady, almost clinical. "All of them." Daniel turned to her. "What agreements?" Irene met his gaze without flinching. "You were a minor," she said. "After Mom and Dad died, the estate transferred. We handled the finances. There were offers." "Offers," Daniel repeated. Lucas stepped in now. "It wasn't what you think." "No?" Daniel asked quietly. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone level. "It was research. Controlled. We were told it would help you. Evaluate neurological resilience, adaptive behavior. For money," Daniel said. Lucas didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just looked at him, and that was enough. The room shifted again. This time, not from outside. From within. Daniel felt it. Something breaking alignment. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just separating. "You signed me over," Daniel said. Irene's voice didn't change. "We authorized financial oversight." "That's not what I asked." A pause. Then, "Yes." Axel moved again. And this time it was different. His body tightened, shoulders lowering, a low sound building in his chest. Not loud, not aggressive. Warning. Not to Daniel, to Evan. Evan watched the dog with that same faint, detached interest. "He remembers," Evan said softly. Daniel turned sharply. "He doesn't. Not cognitively," Evan corrected. "But the body does. Scent, pattern, proximity. Those don't disappear." Axel took a step forward. Daniel felt the tension in the leash of silence that held him back. "Stay," Daniel said quietly. Axel didn't look at him, but he stopped. Evan nodded once, almost approving. "You were always responsive under pressure." Daniel stepped closer now, closing the distance just enough. "What did you do to me?" he asked. Evan tilted his head slightly. "We didn't do anything to you," he said. "We observed. We refined conditions. You adapted." Daniel's hand curled into a fist, then relaxed just as quickly. "People died," he said. Evan didn't blink. "Some did." "And me?" A pause. The faintest shift in Evan's expression. Not regret. Calculation. "You survived," he said. "That made you valuable." The words didn't hit like an accusation. They landed like confirmation. Daniel exhaled slowly. Not anger. Not yet. Something else. Understanding. Not of them. Of himself. He turned away, just slightly, eyes drifting toward the hallway. The one that led down to the basement. To the files. To the version of him that had no memory. Axel moved beside him again, pressing lightly against his leg. Grounding. Daniel nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then he spoke. "Get out." Lucas frowned. "Daniel, now!" Irene didn't argue. Evan didn't move immediately. He studied Daniel for one last moment. Then, quietly, "We didn't expect you to come back here," he said. "That was our mistake." Daniel didn't respond. Evan put his gloves back on, one finger at a time, and turned toward the door. The storm swallowed them again, but this time, the silence they left behind didn't feel empty. It felt exposed. The house did not settle after they left. It shifted. Daniel felt it in the way the silence rearranged itself. No longer heavy, no longer waiting. Something inside Hollow Peak had moved from observation to reaction, the kind of change you didn't see with your eyes. Axel stayed close as Daniel crossed the main room again, his movement slower now. Not cautious, but deliberate. He wasn't searching anymore. He was narrowing. "Margaret didn't keep evidence in the open," Daniel said, more to the space than to the dog. "She hid access." Axel angled toward the side hallway, the one they hadn't fully explored. Daniel followed. The corridor was narrower than the others, walls slightly uneven, as if it had been added later, not built with the original structure. A shelf stood at the far end, cluttered with objects that didn't belong together. Old books, broken glass, rusted tools. Nothing valuable, which made it exactly the kind of place someone would ignore. Axel stopped in front of it. He didn't sniff. He didn't paw. He just stood still, one front paw lifting slightly before pressing down against the base of the shelf. Daniel watched him for a moment, then stepped forward. "You're sure?" he murmured. Axel didn't move. Daniel placed both hands on the side of the shelf and pushed. It resisted at first, then shifted. Just enough. A low scrape echoed through the wall as the shelf slid aside, revealing a narrow opening behind it. Cold air pushed out. Not natural cold, not from the storm. Contained. Preserved. Daniel didn't hesitate. They stepped through. The staircase beyond was steep, unfinished, leading upward instead of down. The wood creaked under Daniel's weight, but not with age, with tension. Like it had been built quickly, then sealed away. The air thinned as they climbed, and by the time they reached the top, Daniel could see his breath. The attic wasn't what he expected. It wasn't cluttered. It was organized. Rows of metal containers, sealed and labeled with codes. Equipment stored with precision. A work table at the center, its surface cleared except for a single object. A heavy steel dial embedded into a reinforced door set into the far wall. A vault, but not one meant for valuables. Daniel stepped closer, the faint hum beneath his boots becoming noticeable now. Electric, but subtle. Axel moved past him, circling the room once before stopping near the door. Daniel ran his fingers over the metal surface. cold, unworn, used, but not frequently. "This is it," he said quietly. He turned the dial. Nothing. No immediate response. No click. Just resistance. Daniel stepped back, scanning the room again. Margaret hadn't hidden the vault. She had hidden how to open it. His eyes moved across the table, the containers, the walls, until something caught. A small metal box, tucked under the edge of the table, not labeled like the others. He crouched and pulled it free. Inside, paper. Not files, not reports. A single folded sheet. Daniel opened it carefully. Numbers. 4 sequences, written in a tight, deliberate hand. No explanation. No labels. Just 48, 27, 43, 98. Daniel stared at them. Axel shifted closer, his presence steady at Daniel's side. "These aren't random," Daniel murmured. "Dates, not data points." Daniel's mind worked through them, not as information, but as pattern. He stood, turning back to the vault. "Not the order they happened," he said quietly. "The order she wanted remembered." His fingers moved across the dial again. A pause. The mechanism resisted, then eased slightly. A faint internal shift. Axel's body stilled completely. The vault clicked. Not loudly, but definitively. Daniel stepped back as the heavy door released with a low, controlled exhale, like something sealed too long finally giving way. Inside, gold. Stacks of it. Bars, coins, sealed pouches. Daniel didn't move. He didn't step closer, because he already knew. This wasn't the point. And he reached past it, brushing aside a layer of stored wealth like it was nothing more than insulation. Behind it, cases, hard drives, encrypted storage units, folders, names, a network, not money. Structure. Daniel pulled one file free, flipping it open. A list of individuals, corporations, shell accounts, locations tied together through coded references. Axel let out a low breath, not a warning. Acknowledgement. Daniel understood. Margaret hadn't hidden the truth. She had hidden the key to unlock it. And now... He had it. The sound came suddenly. Sharp. Close. Daniel turned. The attic door burst inward. Lucas moved first, faster than before. No hesitation now. Irene behind him, and Evan, unchanged, controlled, watching everything. "You found it," Lucas said. Not surprised. Certain. Daniel didn't respond. Evan stepped forward slightly, eyes drifting past the gold, settling on the files in Daniel's hands. "Of course he did," Evan murmured. "He always followed structure." Axel moved in front of Daniel. This time, there was no subtlety. A low growl built, deep and steady. Lucas's voice cut through it. "Put it down!" Daniel didn't move. "You don't want this," Lucas continued, his tone calm but edged. "This isn't about inheritance anymore." "It never was," Daniel said. Irene stepped forward, her voice sharper now. "If that data leaves this room, you don't walk away clean." Daniel glanced at her. "Neither do you." A flicker, brief, controlled. "But there," Evan spoke next. "You won't get the chance," he said quietly. Daniel met his gaze, and for the first time, he believed him. Lucas reached into his coat, pulling out a folded document. "Emergency petition," he said. "We filed this tonight. You're declared unfit to manage your own affairs. PTSD, instability, prior incidents. Everything gets pulled." Daniel felt the words land, but not the way they were meant to. Not as fear, as confirmation. "They've already prepared it," Daniel said. Lucas didn't deny it. Axel's growl deepened as Evan took another step forward. "Stand down," Daniel said quietly. Axel didn't move. Evan stopped anyway. Daniel's eyes shifted once, to the open vault, to the data, to Helen standing just beyond the doorway. He hadn't noticed her step in, but she was there, watching, waiting. Daniel held her gaze, a single moment. No words. Then he moved. Fast. Not toward them. Toward her. The file in his hand pressed into Helen's grip. "Take it," he said. Her fingers closed around it instantly. Lucas reacted. Too late. Evan moved. Axel intercepted. Not a wild attack. Attack. A calculated block. Body slamming into Evan's legs just enough to disrupt, to create space. The impact echoed through the room. Axel didn't stop. A sharp movement. A cry. Brief. Contained. Then silence again. Axel pulled back, limping slightly, his breathing heavier now. Daniel stepped between them. Steady. "It's done," he said. No anger. No triumph. Just fact. Helen didn't wait. She turned and moved, already pulling her phone, already dialing. Lucas stared at Daniel, something breaking through his control for the first time. "You just burned everything," he said. Daniel looked at him. "No," he said quietly. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't already on fire." The storm broke by morning. Not all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, the wind dropping from a howl to a steady breath, snow thinning into a fine, drifting curtain. By the time the first light pushed through the clouds, Hollow Peak looked less like a fortress and more like something abandoned to time. Daniel didn't sleep. He stayed in the main room, sitting on the edge of a chair that wasn't his, watching the slow return of daylight through narrow windows. The house felt quieter now, not empty, not tense, resolved. Axel lay a few feet away, resting on his side. His breathing was even, but the stiffness in his body hadn't faded. The bandage around his shoulder, improvised, clean, but temporary, stood out sharply against his dark coat. Daniel glanced at him more than once, not to check if he was alive, to make sure he was still there. A phone buzzed on the table, Millen, and Daniel picked it up, his thumb hovering over the screen for half a second before answering. "It's done," she said. No greeting, no hesitation. "What does that mean?" Daniel asked. "It means everything you handed me is already in motion," Helen replied. "Legal channels first, then press. There's too much here to bury." Daniel stood slowly, his gaze drifting toward the open vault upstairs, out of sight, but not out of mind. "And them?" he asked. "Contained for now," she said, "but not finished." Daniel nodded once, even though she couldn't see it. "They'll come after you," she added. "Not like last night. This will be cleaner." Daniel looked down at his hand, at the faint line where his fingers had pressed too hard into the metal edge of the vault. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. There was a pause on the line. Not doubt, not concern. Acknowledgement. "I know," Helen said. The call ended. Silence returned, but it didn't feel the same. Daniel moved to the window, watching as a truck made its way up the distant road. Slow, deliberate, cutting through the remaining snow. Not his. Not theirs either. Official. He stepped outside before it reached the clearing. The cold hit sharper in daylight, less forgiving without the cover of storm. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked down the path, Axel following, slower than usual, but steady. The truck stopped at the edge of the property. 2 people stepped out. One wore a dark coat with a badge clipped just inside the lapel, not displayed, but visible enough. The other carried a case, slim and reinforced, the kind meant for documents that couldn't be replaced. They didn't rush. They didn't speak until they were close enough. "Daniel Voss?" the first man asked. Daniel nodded. The man introduced himself simply. "Agent Cole." Federal investigation. His voice carried no weight beyond its purpose, no curiosity, no judgment. "Procedure. We'll need a statement," Cole said, "and access to the property." Daniel glanced back at the house, then at Axel. Axel stood beside him, one paw pressing lightly against the toe of Daniel's boot. Grounding. "Inside," Daniel said. The process took hours. Not interrogation. Not exactly. Clarification. Dates. Names. What Daniel remembered. Which wasn't much. What he saw. Which was enough. The second agent, a woman with dark hair tied back tightly, barely spoke. She listened, occasionally writing something down, her expression unreadable. When they finished, the man closed his notebook. "There will be a formal evaluation," he said. Daniel didn't ask. He already knew. "Standard procedure," the agent added, "given the circumstances." Daniel nodded once. Understood. They left without ceremony. No assurances. No conclusions. Just the next step in something much larger than the house behind him. By late afternoon, the sun had pushed fully through the clouds. The mountains looked different in the light, less threatening, more distant. The kind of distance that didn't promise safety, just perspective. Daniel sat on the front step. Axel lowered himself beside him carefully, favoring one side, but refusing help. "You could have stayed back," Daniel said quietly. Axel didn't respond. He rested his head briefly against Daniel's knee, then lifted it again, eyes scanning the open space ahead. Always watching. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on his thighs. For the first time since arriving, he let himself stop. Not think, not analyze, just sit. The weight of everything didn't disappear, but it shifted. Less like pressure, more like something he could carry. A week later, the evaluation came. Clinical offices, neutral walls, questions asked in calm voices that didn't try to understand, only to measure. Daniel answered them all. He didn't avoid anything, didn't reshape it. He told the truth as it existed now, not as it should have been. When it was over, the doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a careful tone, closed the file and looked at him for a long moment. "You're not unstable," he said. Daniel didn't react. "You've been through controlled trauma," the man continued. "Repeated exposure, memory interference. That doesn't make you incapable." Daniel exhaled slowly. "No," the doctor added, almost to himself. "It means you adapted." That word again. Adapted. Daniel stood, nodding once before leaving. Outside, Axel waited near the car, tail low but steady. Daniel approached him, crouching slightly despite the stiffness in his own body. Axel leaned into him, not heavily, not urgently, just enough. Daniel rested his hand against the side of Axel's neck, fingers pressing into the thick fur. "They didn't break you," Daniel said quietly. Axel's ear flicked once. Nathaniel's gaze drifted upward, toward the distant line of mountains, toward Hollow Peak. He could go back. He knew that. But not to live. Not the way it had been. Some places weren't meant to be owned. They were meant to be understood, and then changed. Daniel stood slowly. Axel rose with him. Together, they walked toward the car. Not away. Forward. Some truths don't come to us gently. They come when we finally stop running. Daniel didn't win because he was stronger, or smarter, or untouched by pain. He stood his ground when it would have been easier to stay silent. And sometimes, that's what it means to choose what's right. Not when it's safe, but when it costs you something. In our own lives, the hardest choices are often the ones no one sees. The quiet decisions. The moments when you either protect yourself or stand for something bigger than you. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in his place? And if you want more stories like this, about courage, truth, and the choices that shape who we become, consider subscribing. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you find the strength to stand firm when it matters most, and the peace that comes after.